Hey guys, it's Allie. Welcome back to Infertile AF, the podcast. This is episode 222 called Katy and Alisha. This podcast is sponsored by Receptiva DX. Receptiva DX is a powerful test that has helped thousands of women who have experienced recurrent pregnancy loss or IVF failure. The test helps detect inflammatory conditions of the uterus that might be preventing you from becoming pregnant or staying pregnant. The most common underlying condition of a positive Receptiva DX test is endometriosis with or without symptoms. If you or someone you know has struggled with IVF, Receptiva DX may give you the answer and treatment protocols that you're looking for. Talk with your doctor about Receptiva DX because the journey is so worth it. Plus, guys, Infertile AF listeners are getting $75 off the Receptiva DX test. So all you have to do is go to receptivadx.com or download the app Receptiva DX, use code INFERTILEAF23, and you'll get $75 off. Thanks, Receptiva DX. Today's episode is presented by Belly. Belly offers modern prenatal vitamins optimized for fertility, prenatal, and post-pregnancy health. To learn more about how to optimize your fertility and pregnancy health, check out their vegan-friendly, dairy-free, non-GMO vitamins for both men and women at bellybaby.com. That's spelled BELIBABY.com. The best part, if you use code ALLIE15, you'll get 15% off your first month of either Belly Women or Belly Men. Again, that's code ALLIE15, ALI15, for 15% off. Thanks, Belly. All right, guys, such a good episode today and two incredible women. Today, I'm talking to Katy Seppi, who's the creator of Childless Collective on Instagram, and Alisha, who's the creator of To Be Childfree on Instagram, about living and thriving without children after infertility. Okay, so you guys might remember Katy, who told her full infertility story on my podcast back in 2020, and we've been really good friends ever since. She's incredible. She's going to talk today about all the work that she's been doing to support everybody in the community who's pivoted from their family building journeys and are now living childless, not by choice. And Alisha, who I just met, who also is amazing, is another really strong voice and bright light in the Embrace Childless community. She's going to talk about her struggles with infertility, her 2 chemical pregnancies, why she walked away when IVF was brought to the table, and everything that she's doing to raise awareness and blast stigmas and support the childless after infertility community as well. We are all also going to talk about childless versus child-free and some of the terminology that goes around with it. We're going to talk about how we all really dislike the term giving up or don't give up, and how infertility and treatment can lead to depression and anxiety. And also, Katy and Alisha are going to give their advice for listeners for creating a beautiful, full, childless life. So, like I said, these women are amazing. I really love this whole conversation. Without further ado, this is Katy and Alisha's Infertility Stories. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have 2 friends on the show today. I've got Katy and Alisha. You guys might remember Katy from a couple of years ago. She told her whole story on my show. I will link the episode in the show notes so you guys can listen to that, and on my social as well. And Alisha is a new friend. So we're going to be talking about, what both of them are going through now and what has happened in their lives and where they're at and all that stuff. So hello. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to start with you, Katy, because I've known you for a couple of years now. We met through Instagram, of course. And like I said, you were on my show, but you have, done so much in the childless community. And I guess before we even get started, let's talk about terms, because I know that's really important to you. And Alisha, feel free to chime in as well. So when you have gone through an infertility journey and then, you walk away with no living children, what do you call that? Like, how do you like to refer to that lifestyle?
Okay, so I'm going to give my answer, and then Alisha, you may have a different take than me, but I feel like what I've learned over the years is that there's so much muddiness around this that if you look outside of our community, it gets even more complicated. And so I feel like generally using childless is a term that is kind of known to describe someone who wanted kids and couldn't have them. Child-free is typically used for someone who didn't want kids. And so if we're just talking about like generally, I would say I've started just using childless to make it clear outside of the community. That's kind of the general term those definitions encompass. Mm-hmm. But for people's individual stories, I feel like each of us can decide what we want to label ourselves. So you'll see like child-free or child-free after infertility get used. And I always mm-hmm. feel like individuals should be able to identify in whatever, mm-hmm. Makes them feel most comfortable. But I think for just general terms, if I was saying like someone from outside the community, I would say probably childless after infertility or involuntarily childless would be kind of the more standard term if you're trying to be safe. But Alisha, what do you think?
I appreciate that explanation. And I think just to acknowledge there's so much nuance. And I think there's a lot of power that you can gain by being able to pick and choose. Like, this is how I identify myself. So I am childless, not by choice, but I live a child-free after infertility life. And so how I view my personal identity is I like to say that I'm child-free because I want to acknowledge and honor the ambivalence actually that I had about becoming a parent. I didn't really truly embrace that, I would say, until more recently in the last couple of years. And I know that that may sound kind of contradictory, right? Like I wanted a baby, but I didn't want a baby at the same time. And I think it's just really true to sometimes some of the experience for some people that doesn't get talked about a lot. And so that's why I really like to identify as being child-free, because I made the choice to walk away from infertility, but I also made the choice to say, you know what, I actually really secretly was wanting to maybe not have a child during, I mean, I would literally be going to, maybe treatment but all at the same time going what am I going to do when I have a child? I don't know if I really want this, but I'm still physically going through the process. And so I think that has been really helpful for me to just really honor that part of myself. So I say I'm child-free after infertility, but that doesn't mean that I also don't have brief moments. I'm very much living in the both and. I call it the relief and grief sort of place. Relief that I don't have children, but I also grieve that I don't have children. So
I think that's such a great term. And I think it's so important to point out that it's not necessarily you have to feel one way or the other, right? We're humans. We have contradictory feelings. We have simultaneous feelings. So I like that there's a relief and a grief at the same time. That's really interesting and such a great way to articulate that. So can you tell us a little bit more about your story, Alisha, and what brought you to where you are now? As far, as much as you want to get into your family building journey and all that, we'd love to hear as much as you're willing to share.
Sure. So similar to you and Katy, we're Instagram friends. I met Katy through Instagram. That's kind of where I think some of us sometimes feel the most comfort to show up in. And so my childless journey started back actually in 2014. So it's been about 9 years. Actually, I was just reflecting on this the other day. And I'm like, oh, it's been almost 10 years, another more year. And it'd be 10 years, a decade out from the beginning of it. So in February of 2014, I had a chemical pregnancy and I had just gotten married a few months before. So, if you can imagine, you're sort of on this high and you're coming down from the Christmas holidays and things, if you celebrate that, then kind of the energy and the time that goes into that. And then you're sort of coming on this letdown and then you're oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. Whoa, wasn't expecting this so quickly, but okay, we're doing this. And then all of a sudden we weren't doing that. And so it was just a really big roller coaster of emotions. And then about a little over a year later, I had another chemical pregnancy. And so then that really sent me into a state of confusion. Why is this happening? And then went down a long journey of wellness journey, integrative medicine, getting some medical support and intervention and evaluation, and basically doing all the things that I could possibly think of until right before having the option to do IVF. And so once that option was on the table, I walked away from my infertility journey. And pretty much single-handedly made that decision without my partner. I'm partnered, I'm married. And so having so much emotional upheaval from going through, having conversations with the medical staff, the office, I didn't feel like was warm and supportive, and just kind of how that medical experience was just added to the collective stress. And so I said, I just can't mentally and physically do this anymore. It's going to break me if I do. So I needed to walk away from that. And I needed to tell my husband, like, I'm making this decision, but I'm hoping that you'll support this, because I just don't think I could do this. And so then it just kind of went from there. As far, that was probably the end of 2017. And then I call it kind of my hosting years, kind of autopilot. Sometimes it's griefy, and sometimes you're just kind of like, hey, I had a weekend getaway and I'm loving life, but not really actually talking about, like, is this the finality of our journey? So we actually did a weekend getaway just a little over 2 years ago. And that was our child-free weekend. We declared it that we were taking that trip specifically, that our conversations that whole weekend was going to be to explore what were we going to do? We were going to do the final closing the door of, not even considering, like, what if I had an oops pregnancy, and was it even thinking about, planning and seeking out, medical intervention again. And what if that happened? Like, we finally had that conversation. That was something that we weren't going to explore or do anymore. And we really needed to make a decision for ourselves and our relationship. And so it's been just past our 2-year freedomversary, I guess, if you want to call it. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up here.
Okay. I want to unpack so many things that you touched on. First of all, I think it's so amazing. And Katy, you and I have talked about this as well. And I'd love to hear more from you on this, about taking gauge of your mental health and realizing this is not good for my mental health. I am not okay, like, mentally. I think that sometimes people just, and myself included, kind of get on this ride and put the blinders on and just say, this is what the outcome that I want, and I will do no matter what. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's to each his own, obviously, or her own. But I do think it's really amazing how you guys took such care of yourselves and did that whole weekend, and probably had some of the hardest conversations you've ever had. And I won't, ask you about the details and all that stuff, because I know that's your private stuff, but I think it's really wonderful that you did that and took the time to really, really think it through, and you probably flipped it over and what if this happens, and all, looked at it from so many different ways. So I know this is not an easy decision to come to for so many, but I think that's a really great example of, the path that you chose and how you kind of got there. Katy, do you want to talk about the mental health aspect of it a little bit? And then there's a couple other things I want to ask you about, Alisha, based on something that you said, but Katy, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm going to step back a bit, even from the mental health piece, and say that I think for a lot of us, parenthood is just the default. Like, a lot of us, I know for me, I didn't even really put a lot of thought into, like, pros and cons of becoming a parent, or, like, is this actually something I want? I grew up Mormon, and there was, I think within that context, and also just societally, it was like, you grow up, you get married, you become a parent, and then at some point, like, your kids, like, you're empty nesters and you have grandkids, and then, like, you retire, and then at some point you die. And, like, there's just this life plan that there's so much, like, pressure and just expectations of, like, this is how it goes. And I think the same goes for once you get into the realm of infertility. The messaging is very similar, where it's like motherhood above all else is the most important thing. It is the, the end all be all of the human experience. And so you have to sacrifice anything that you need to get to that end goal. And I think that for me, seeing how much people are being asked to give, sometimes it's not the healthiest thing. So you talked about mental health, but it's also physical health. It's your finances. It's how it's impacting your relationship, or your relationships with, family, friends. there are just so many costs associated with infertility. And the further you're on that path, the more you're going to be sacrificing in all of those areas or some of those areas. And I think it's a very unhealthy, I know you're like, there's no like better or worse, but I'm just going to say from my perspective, that idea of like put the blinders on and keep going until you have a baby, to me, that scares me so bad to think that that is the norm and the message that's being put across, because not everyone's starting at the same place, first of all. So people are going to be showing up to infertility with different health conditions, different mental health issues, maybe trauma that they've experienced in their past, maybe different levels of like ambivalence about having kids. Like everyone's situation is so unique, and the options, the underlying conditions are unique. The options available to them are unique. The resources they can even have access to pursue are different. So it's easy to be like, just do IVF. Well, some people's bodies can't handle IVF. Some people don't have the finances to pursue that. If you're not the one, like you could say, okay, just put like that 20 grand on your credit card. You may not even have access to credit, let alone like being willing to put that much down, you know? So it's just, it's completely bypassing people's lived experiences and their circumstances. And so to have that be the primary message and the dominant message of like, it's going to be worth it. Whatever you go through, it's worth it. Well, it's not true for everyone. And so for me, it's like, I think it's really important to take stock along the way of like, what am I sacrificing at this point? And is it still worth it? Because I think the flip side of it is like, well, if I don't become a mom, then who am I? My life is meaningless. This is my worst nightmare. It's going to be awful. I'm going to be like grieving my whole life and it's just terrible. Well, that's not the case either. Like most of us actually are able to go through grief, process things that are really hard, and then create lives that we really love. And if you look at most research that's been done around this, it actually shows that when you, and there are little like, you know, tweaks here and there, depending on what research study you look at. But for the most part, parents, people who are child-free by choice, people who are childless for whatever reason, typically have pretty similar levels of meaning, fulfillment, joy. Like there can be little differences depending on the study and how they're identifying it, but it is very possible to have a great life without kids. And I think when you can let yourself explore that as an option and see examples of it in the people around you and let that in as an idea, it can open up a different world of possibilities. And I would say it's not the worst case scenario.
Yeah. And I do want to make clear, like, I'm not saying that the message I'm putting out is put on the blinders. I'm just saying that that was my thought. And I know a lot of other people, you know, think that way as well. And it's self-imposed. It wasn't because anybody told me that, but it brings up a good point, which is the term that really bothers me. And I want to hear both of your opinions on this. When somebody's like, don't give up. That really, really bothers me because, and I'll tell you why. And then I want to hear what you guys have to say. Like, I feel like it's puts such a negative spin on making the pivot or deciding to walk away from whether it be treatment or trying to have kids or whatever your scenario is. And it's to say that somebody gave up, I feel like has such a negative connotation. And I don't like that. I don't like the message that it puts out there. So what do you guys think of that?
Yeah, I think, gosh, we could probably talk for years about this because I think something that Katy mentioned earlier, talking about how we all come from different spaces and places as far as, you know, kind of arriving to infertility and what are the resources, you know, our mental bandwidth, you know, physical ability, all those different things that actually make us unique in who we are. But I think, you know, whatever that combination of our identity is, when someone says, don't give up, they may not be able to see the things that are going on internally or like an invisible illness that we're experiencing. And so what we're hearing, you know, on the other end is, you know, I'm shaming you if you do give up. I don't think that it's acceptable for you to give up. So you shouldn't be doing this. What you're doing is wrong by giving up. Like that's sometimes the internal message that can be heard for us. And so if we're walking away from this journey without a baby, then that just adds to the depth of the grief work that we're doing and the trauma that we're maybe experiencing, adding to our own personal experiences. And so that can be really, really hard. And in reality, nobody actually really needs to verbally tell us that, because we see all the messages around us, right? We see it, celebrating Mother's Day, Father's Day, Siblings Day, like all the things that come up, all the special occasions that aren't, real big holidays are made into holidays on a consistent basis. And that's the waters that we have to swim in consistently. We don't ever get to sort of jump out of the pool. Like, we're in it all the time. And it's just, we have to figure out how to swim against the current, because we're always coming up against something that's going to push us back. And so we have to figure out how to keep going for our own sake, not for someone else's sake.
I think it's even just the term giving up that bothers me too, because I don't see it like that. It's like, maybe you're pivoting and embracing a better life for yourself. And maybe it's, like, I would love to put a more positive spin on that. So Katy, what are your thoughts on all that?
Oh, I completely agree. I hate the term give up, and it's used in a few ways. So even when people say, I'm so glad I didn't give up because now I have a baby, it even if they're talking about their own experience, it's this idea that if you keep trying hard enough, anyone can get to a baby, which is just not the case. Like, you tell me someone that that went to a lot of extremes to get their baby, and I can tell you someone who did this every single step, same in the childless community, and did not have a baby. I can tell you someone, I guarantee it. And so this idea that if you just want it enough, if you keep trying, you will get to that end of a baby, is just not accurate. And I think the idea of never give up, or that someone is giving up, it's with the assumption that you could have tried more, you should have done more. And if you had, you would get to the baby, but you must not want it enough. You must not, have enough strength. We think about like infertility warriors. And I think it just, again, it bypasses all of the personal circumstances that people have that may lead them to making the decision to not pursue treatments or to not pursue whatever the next option is. I think, and I do want to clarify, like when you said you like putting on the blinders and just going with it, I did that too for quite a few years. And I think my body got to a place, my mental health got to a place, my other areas of my life were in shambles, to where I said, okay, can't put my body through this anymore. Like my first cycle of IVF, it was awful. My endometriosis and fibroids symptoms got so much worse, and it was debilitating to where it hurt to walk. I couldn't wear jeans. I couldn't wear a seatbelt. Like, for someone to say, do that again. No, like my body's telling me, like, your body does not like this. Don't do this again. Right. And, but I felt pressure, like, well, yeah, of course I have to do this because I have insurance coverage. So I'd be crazy not to do another. Sorry, I don't like using the term crazy. Like I have to do the cycle because I shouldn't give up, and I have the insurance coverage for it. So why wouldn't I? Right. Well, I got to a point where I was like, I can't keep giving in these other areas. If I keep going, something else in my life is going to break. My body's going to break. My mental health's going to break. My relationship's going to break. Something is not going to survive this. And maybe this is a good time to just put on the brakes and say, you know what, I'm going to, like you said, I'm pivoting. So yeah, I don't like the term never give up. I think the idea of framing it as giving up is just the wrong way to frame it. Especially when you think about the fact that most people who are parents just get pregnant naturally within the first year of just trying to conceive. And that is their path to parenthood. Like all they do is have sex for up to a year and they become parents, right? And once you get into that place of infertility, guess what? You've already done more than most parents did to have their kid. You tried longer, you did more already. Right. Even just getting a year of trying without a baby. Right. Anything you choose to go beyond that is like your choice, but I just don't think it should be automatic where it's like, just if you don't exhaust every option and go to the most extremes to have a kid, then you gave up. It just seems really wrong to me to ask people to sacrifice that much if they're not able or willing to. And everyone has different limits for that. And so I think we just need it. For me, it'd be healthier to normalize as a community, like, hey, let's take stock of where you're at and make decisions around like, when does it feel like a good time for you to stop?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe changing some of that language. So I typically will say, you know, I let go of my dream of motherhood and embrace being childless, or I walked away from infertility. I think there's other ways we can frame it instead of this idea of giving up, because it makes it sound like they're like winners and losers and you didn't try hard enough.
Yeah. And it's women, mostly women talking about this, right? And it's almost like pitting us against each other, which is so not how it should be. Alisha, you had mentioned Mother's Day and other holidays. This will come out after Mother's Day since that's in a few days. But tell me how you guys, for someone who's listening that might be, you know, in the scenario of where they might want to pivot or they are newly embraced, you know, letting go and embracing a childless life. How do you navigate like holidays like that? Like Mother's Day, you know, can be obviously really triggering to not only the childless collective and, you know, people who are child free, but also people who are still in the thick of it. So how do you personally navigate stuff like that?
Yeah. Well, that one is, I think sometimes the assumption, and maybe this is my own internal dialogue of like, oh, that you're supposed to be in a better place and at a certain point, and the Mother's Day is going to be fine after a couple of years, right? And realizing that sometimes Mother's Day, it's going to ebb and flow. And I think just to be able to really honor yourself and where you're at with that. If I don't feel like I want to see my mom on Mother's Day or attend an event, I'll just communicate that. Now, it took me some time to get the courage and confidence to express, you know, this is hard for me sometimes to show up. Can we celebrate the next weekend and not on Mother's Day? Because I want to spend time by myself on that day, or I want to do something to honor myself on that day. I've planted a garden one year. I think I had a burning ceremony a couple years ago where I took all of my fertility receipts, doctor's receipts, the diagrams that showed me where I had to do my injections, and I burned them all in my backyard on Mother's
Yes,
Day.
I love that.
And that was so freeing because that allowed me to sort of visualize myself as like, I'm like a phoenix rising from the ashes. I'm going to rise above the things that are happening that make me feel really down. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to not acknowledge that that ever was a part of myself, but it helped me to mentally and physically actually move forward and stuff, because I was really holding myself back a lot with the internal messages that I had heard from others or seen just, you know, in media or whatever it is, the social pressures, cultural pressures, religious pressures, all those things. I mean, we carry that from when we're really young. And so I think sometimes when we get to this point of how do we manage and go through something that celebrates something that we don't have, that's not part of our identity, it can be really feeling conflicting sometimes. And so I think, again, it's really trying to figure out how can you come up with the words to express to your loved ones that this is hard for me, and I want to join or I don't want to join. And what does that look like for you? And being able to find the things that feel good for you as far as either taking care of yourself, you know, treating yourself to something that makes you feel good and find joy in that day, even though you might have been crying 30 minutes before. Like, I mean, so I think it's just really finding that self-acceptance of this is how I'm feeling today. I think community has been such a huge thing too. And so there's a lot of community calls or, you know, Zoom meetups and things. And that's very, very strong and prominent in Childless Collective community, Lighthouse Women, just Instagram friends. We're all, I mean, messaging, all kinds of stuff. And leading up actually to Mother's Day the attention has increased, I think, amongst everyone, because they know that sometimes this can be a really hard time. So, yeah.
When you download the Kroger app, you have easy access to savings every day. Shop weekly sales and get personalized coupons to get the most value out of every trip, every time, whether you shop in-store or online. Download the Kroger app now to save big. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Must have a digital account to redeem offers. Restrictions may apply. See site for details.
Save big on your favorites with the Buy 5 or More, Save $1 each sale. Simply buy 5 or more participating items and save $1 each with your card. Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Do you mind sharing, like, what would be an example of a message that you might send to somebody? Like, what would you say?
I'm like, hey, friend, I see you. Like, literally, it doesn't even have to be like long. I think that sometimes people on the outside feel like they have to give us these really special messages that are long and deep. And it's, I see you. I see you're having a hard time. I'm sorry that you were having a griefy moment. I love you. I care about you. I'm holding space for you. If you want to talk, great. If you don't want to talk about it, that's okay too. Just know that I recognize that you're experiencing this. I think there's a big piece about feeling validated that a lot of childless people talk about, that we don't feel seen or we don't feel validated in our own existence. And I think that when we can feel that and see that others are feeling something very similar, just the synergy and the powerful kind of feedback that gives you it can truly make the difference in how you're navigating kind of in coming into this space and embracing being without a child.
Yeah. Such a good segue, because I wanted to ask Katy about Childless Collective. Tell me, since we last spoke, I feel like you've really had all these great initiatives and programs and events and outreach and all this wonderful stuff. I'm on your mailing list, so I know all the things that you've got going on, and I'm always really impressed at everything. So tell me about your mission with all of this and like what you're trying to get across to people.
Yeah, thank you. So things have really morphed for me. So I started, Chasing Creation was my initial kind of project that I did within the childless community. And it was started as a blog, but I realized I don't like blogging because it's like, it takes me forever to write and it's so one-sided. I didn't get like that communication and feedback from it. And so really what I mostly did was on Instagram. So my handle is now Childless Collective, used to be Chasing Creation. And I really just got to meet so many good friends there. And it was a place for me to like let out what I was feeling and experiencing, just a place to share my thoughts. And then those connections started to grow. And so I've had a few things over the years that I've done. But what is really different right now is that I actually just moved into this full time last July. So I quit my job of almost a decade, and it's the scariest thing I've ever done. And I'm now full-time in providing support to the childless community. So my background is in social work, but I did a community empowerment emphasis. So for me, it's that community. It's like the individual support, but also bringing together community and how can we facilitate that? And so a lot of my focus right now is less, I think, on the individual and more on how do we create like structures that we can put in place for support to bring people together and have that sense of validation and being seen and having the support that you need when for a lot of us, it's really hard to get that in our personal lives because we may not even know another person in our lives that is childless, not by choice. And so some of the bigger things that I am working on, I have started doing a Childless Collective Summit, which has been an online event for the past 2 years. And I've had about 3,000 attendees each year. And so that's been really fun to put together and to bring some of my favorite voices from within the childless community. We had 30 speakers the first year, 40 last year. And I'm going to be planning the 2023 summit for October. So I'm going to be announcing that soon. And then I'm actually planning the very first in-person summit, which is even more terrifying because I'm looking at the budget and I'm like, oh my gosh, people better show up to this or else I'm going to have some major credit card debt.
Yep.
So it's really scary, but I also know how much people are wanting to meet in person. So I'm looking at doing the first in-person event spring of 2024.
Where will you do that?
So, in Charleston, South Carolina. Okay. So I'm in Savannah now. I just moved here. So this is like somewhere close to my home that is a great tourist spot.
Yes.
Like it's just so fun to visit.
I love Charleston. I got engaged in Charleston, actually.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
It's such a fun city.
Yeah.
So I've got the summits, and then for anyone in the childless community, you probably know who Jody Day is because she has been doing work in the childless community for like over a decade. And for a lot of people, she is the first introduction to there being a voice for the childless community. And she last year decided that she was wanting to put effort into different types of projects. She had an online community and was wanting to focus more on what it means to age as someone who's childless and get into kind of your elder years and how that changes. And so, and she's writing a book and just doing all these other projects. So still within the childless space, but was wanting to kind of shift her focus from being the host of the online community that she had. And so we made that shift last summer to me being the full-time host of that community. So it's now called Lighthouse Women, and we have about 800 members there of women and non-binary people who are childless not by choice.
Mm-hmm. Shout out to Jody Day. I met her through you, actually.
She's awesome.
I love her.
Yep.
She did an episode of this podcast as well. So Alisha, tell me how you found Katy. How did you guys meet?
Oh gosh, I don't even remember. It's kind of a blur. I think when I first ended my infertility journey, there was not a lot of resource. Well, I mean, I walked out of the office without any here's a referral. Maybe this might be a nice support group, that type of thing, which is I hear is very common for so many people. So I tried to find local things, but they just weren't fitting my personality and my needs because it was still a lot of people that were trying to have a baby, and that was not but I'm not there. So I felt really isolated going to those. So I think I found actually World Childless Week, Stephanie Phillips online, and saw something through there. I started working with an arts counselor that specializes in infertility, child loss. And so worked with her. And then somehow in that time frame, because this was in the fall of 2020. And I think I would realize my mental health was taking a hit with all the isolation and stuff. And I started reflecting on my life and what was going on. And then I was and I don't have a baby or anything and I'm, so all the mental health stuff to kind of come to surface. So I think I was on Instagram one day somehow. I really couldn't tell you, but I think just over time, commenting, chatting, sending a message here or there. And now it's hey, Katy, what show are you watching? So it's been really fun to sort of evolve and just kind of see that that friendship sort of just grow. And I was telling her, I was oh my gosh, I'm totally going to be a fangirl. I'm going to have be on a podcast with you. So it was just kind of one of those funny full circle moments after the last few years of being in this childless space.
Is this the first time you guys have met on camera?
Oh no, we've met on camera, but it's the first time we're doing something a project.
Doing something together.
Yeah. And I was at the summit last year. So that was kind of fun to present and stuff. And so I'm hey, yeah, I'll definitely do this with you.
I don't feel like you're fangirling. I feel like you're keeping your cool. Well, one thing I do want to talk to both of you about is, both of you have such great content. And I will say Alicia's account is To Be Childfree, TWO. And I'll put this all in the show notes as well. And Katy's, as we said, is Childless Collective. So definitely follow them both, guys, if you are not already. But Katy, I feel like you posted something recently about myths about being childless, not by choice. Can we get into that a little bit? What are some of the things that people think? And then what would you say to debunk those myths? And Alisha, I want to hear your thoughts too, but let's start with Katy.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This could be I could just speak for a week long with no interruption and just still be talking about this. So I'm going to make it incredibly short and then turn it over to Alisha to share a few things from her perspective. But I think the biggest one for me is that I was told as a kid that women or maybe just the message I got is that women who were childless were meant to be pitied and that it was really just this sad thing. And I think, if you wanted kids and you have to let go of that dream, there is a really profound amount of grief. I think for a lot of us, it may be the hardest thing we've ever been through. And that is partly because we have personal grief to process, but then we also just have these complex layers of relationships with family and friends and society and how we're viewed that gets piled on top of us that we also have to wade through. And that makes it super complex and something we have to deal with forever. But I think when we say the grief never goes away, the grief is so strong, all that's true. And it's also not the whole story, because what I have found from meeting thousands of people in the childless community is that the people here are some of the most incredible, interesting, cool people I have ever met. And what you don't hear is that just picture in your mind, whether you're a parent or if you just know a parent, think about how much time does that parent invest in their children? How much money is being invested in their children? How much of their emotional capacity is being invested. Like, think of everything you have to invest in your child to like raise a kid, right? Now picture that all of those same resources, your time, your energy, your money, your everything can be invested where you would like to invest it. Now, that's not to say we don't have responsibilities, right? Like, just because we're childless doesn't mean we have like full flexibility. We have other responsibilities and people we care for and, you know, things that we do. But it also means that like suddenly you have all this flexibility and freedom in where you want to invest those things. And that can make for some pretty cool and interesting lives. And no one seems as interested or wanting to ask us about it. But if you do, you might find that like we're actually pretty cool and we're doing cool things. And it's not just like the grief part isn't the whole story. And I hear people say grief never goes away. I'm sure I'll probably experience moments of grief in my life, but I can tell you where I'm at now, like 6 years post hysterectomy. I have very little grief. I don't know the last time I cried about being childless that I felt really that sad about it. And I'm not saying that that is everyone's experience. I think everyone deals with grief and processes it differently. And maybe I'll have waves later. But if someone said to me, I can wave a magic wand and put your baby in your arms today, I would actually say no, because I built something different and it's not what I want anymore. And so I think that those are the parts that get left out of the story, that it's not just like you can go on and find a way to be okay. Like for a lot of us, it's like, no, we're actually like, our lives are pretty dope and we're pretty happy with like what we built and created outside of motherhood. And I don't think we get to share those parts of ourselves as much.
I remember, I feel like it was Jody Day who was like, I'm thriving. Like, I'm not just like surviving, like I'm thriving, and people don't talk about that a lot. So I thought, yeah, I think that's really cool. What about you, Alisha? What are some things that you want people to know or like myths that you want to debunk?
Yeah, I think kind of what Katy was talking about is, you know, like we're doing some really cool stuff. And again, to kind of support what Jody was even saying about surviving and thriving, like we are doing some really amazing stuff. I mean, people are going back to school and learning something that they always wanted to. I know I hear a lot of people sometimes say, you know, I chose a certain job because I thought I was going to have children. And so now I realize I don't really want to do that anymore. Like, what am I going to do? And people are traveling to some really awesome places. And so I think realizing that sometimes when you walk away without a baby, it doesn't mean that it's not going to feel painful, but it also has a lot of opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, once you wade through some of that grief and it feels a little bit lighter, like there's so many opportunities. And we don't talk about like, there's a lot of things that you could do actually without a child in your life. And I think part of that kind of myth is like that people assume we need to be sad all the time. And so sometimes I think that's why we don't talk about what we are doing. I think for me, I can only speak for myself, but I do feel a little guilty when I do post things or I'll rewrite something a few times because I don't want to hurt someone else's feelings who's maybe not at a place of embracing childlessness, or maybe they're still trying. And I don't want to come off as being rude, but I'm realizing I'm actually minimizing my joy in being without children because I want to protect and to, you know, not hurt someone else's feelings. But I'm actually minimizing myself in doing that. And so, you know, kind of figuring out like, how do you live in that in between sort of space and be authentic? And so sometimes we will just not share parts of ourselves because people don't find it kind of interesting and stuff. And I think too, I don't know if this is something that a lot of people have talked about either, but like we know a lot of stuff. Like, and, you know, I think sometimes when I hear, you know, the thing that's like gets me activated is, well, as a mom, I'm like, oh, like, yes, I know as a mom that you're doing a lot of things, you're managing schedules. Like, trust me, I know that that's hard work, but also as a insert whatever profession or thing that you do, like, I also have to manage schedules and it just in a different way, but it doesn't mean that what I'm doing is less value than what you're doing as a parent. And so I think that sometimes is, you know, when we talk about triggers and stuff, that's something that like kind of gets under my skin a bit, because then it kind of means like, oh, well, you don't know how to do this stuff because you don't have kids. It's like, but I do actually do know. I know a lot of really cool things and a lot of like facts and figures that I could talk about too, but it's just not going to be in our same like maybe common circle of things that we talk about, because we do live a different life in a lot of different ways, but also have a lot of things in common. Like, I think people think that we don't have a lot of things in common, and we probably actually do have a lot of things in common with those who have, children in their families, than we actually realize. We like a lot of the same interests and stuff. We just may not spend the same amount of time on them because we may have a different, schedule and allowance for that, but we're still like real people.
That's the thing that bothers me is like when there's that holier than thou, like, well, as a mom, or you wouldn't understand, you don't have kids. Like, I just want to smack those people. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, it's just not cool. And as women, it's not how we should be treating each other. It's like like you have your life, you do you. And it really, really gets to me. It really bothers me when people say stuff like that.
I'm going to be devil's advocate a little bit and say, I think there are circumstances where when someone says as a mom and they're talking specifically about like something that is unique to motherhood, then it doesn't bother me. Like, but I think that a lot of the times when I hear it get used, it will be like, as a mom, seeing like so many children die in war is heartbreaking. And it's like, well, guess what? I think that's heartbreaking too. And like being a mom doesn't give you like a different level of empathy for other people's kids or like a greater capacity to love. So but the other thing I'll say, because what I see come up so much with like the mothers and non-mothers and like friendships and how do we like create relationships. And I just want to build on what Alisha said in that we miss you. If you are our friends that have kids and we don't see you as much, we miss the hell out of you and we miss that connection. We want to find ways to build that bridge because we want our friendships to stay strong. And I think there are a lot of things that get in the way of that because some of the things that you're experiencing as a mom could be very like activating for us and could be really difficult for us to process. But there are ways, I think, that we can bridge that divide and be like sensitive of and aware of like the experiences that moms are having and also the sensitivities and experiences of like non-moms. But that like we need to find better ways to bridge that because a lot of friendships are getting deteriorated by not being able to have those conversations or the sensitivities not being there on both sides and needing to figure out like, how do we do that? Because I'm starting to see a lot of rhetoric that's like, moms and not moms and you can't be friends, like you can't bridge a friendship between the two. And I hate that because like I love my friends that are moms and I miss the hell out of them when we can't make our schedules fit. And I think there's challenges, but I want to figure out, like, I would love to start having more conversations about like, how do we do that well?
Katy, that's a good idea for your next summit. A good session.
Well, the problem is I only have one side of the conversation, right? Like, I need to be able to find ways to get the word out to moms because most moms are not following me or like hearing they're not coming to my summit. They're not hearing anything that I'm saying. So yeah, we got to find those bridges.
We can cross promote it. That's what I'm saying. Getting both perspectives. I think that's really interesting. And I think just female friendships in general are so important. So any tools that you can acquire to keep them, thriving and going through all the different seasons of our lives, I think are really important. I feel like I've never felt so grateful for the female friendships that I have than I do now. There's those relationships are so important to me. All right. Well, before we wrap, guys, I want to remind everybody, follow you both, Childless Collective and To Be Child Free. So if somebody's listening right now, and I want to ask this for both of you, and they're like kind of teetering and they're not sure which way they want to pivot. Do they want to let go and embrace a different lifestyle? Or are they, not sure? Again, I'm not going to say anything about giving up because that rhetoric needs to just go away. But what would you guys say with where you're at right now? Like something that you know now that you didn't know before you made that final decision to be where you are? Starting with you, Alisha.
You're going to be okay. Whatever you decide, you're going to be okay. I think that's a big fear for a lot of people is like, but like, what's going to happen? Like, what if I can't like be in this existence without being a parent? And you're going to be okay. And you're going to have, the biggest loving community just waiting to embrace you when you're ready, if that's the decision you do make. And if you walk away without a baby, like so much love that is almost to the point where it's overwhelming of how much care and concern that the childless community has for each other.
I love that. All right, Katy, what about you?
Yep. I'm going to echo what Alisha said. And I would also just add that when you're going through infertility, you get presented a lot of options of like, here are your next choices. And so, that could, depending on where you're at, that could be, you can do IVF, you can look at donor eggs, you can adopt, you get options laid out in front of you that you consider. And I would just say having an option B that you are considering, be like having this be my endpoint of infertility and moving forward with a life without kids, adding that into the options and having it be something that you consider doesn't mean that that's where it's going to end, right? But it's helpful to at least include that so that it's in your mind and you can be taking stock as you go of, well, what are my limits? Where will I reach maybe a stopping point? What would it look like to say I'm giving too much at this point? Adding it in as an option, I just think that when you're looking at your full spectrum of what's available to me, what's left that I can choose from, it can't hurt to add that in and to give that as much weight and research as you might your other options, because some of the things that you may be afraid of, you may find, okay, maybe this isn't going to be as bad as I thought. So I would just add that in as introducing it as a viable option. And maybe you do still pursue the second IVF treatment or whatever it is that you want to pursue, but just having it listed in there as this is a valid option too. And then just what Alisha said, I wish that I had ways to connect to community earlier in my experience. I had a difficult time finding it. There wasn't as much that existed 5 years ago as there is now. So I would just say get connected to other people who are childless after infertility first thing, because that's going to be your new support network and you're going to need them. So on Instagram, my friend Tanya Hubbard and I created a hashtag embracing childless. And I really recommend that one. We there is childless and childless not by choice, but what we find is childless not by choice gets used a lot for some reason for pregnancy announcements and people still trying to conceive. And then childless gets used a lot by parents who are without their kids for a day, oh, date night, we have a babysitter, hashtag childless. And so we created embracing childless because it's unique enough that it only gets used by the childless not by choice community. So that is a great place to start if you're just trying to look for those initial connections or find people.
Okay, thank you guys so much for listening. Definitely check out Katy on Instagram at Childless Collective and check out Alisha at To Be Childfree. It's TWO, Be Childfree. Follow them both if you're not already. I want to thank both of them for coming on and being honest and, just talking about something that I feel like personally does not get enough light shed on it. So thank you both for doing that. Thank you guys for listening. Also, don't forget to check out Fertility Rally, the community I co-created with Blair Nelson. We are here for you. We are open. We are always looking to have new members come to our support groups and our events. We have an awesome event coming up in IRL event, in real life event in Chicago in August. So that's going to be great, but tons of other stuff too. So check us out on Instagram at Fertility Rally and on the big World Wide Web at fertilityrally.com. And finally, if you have anything you need or you want to get in touch with me directly, you can DM me on Instagram at infertileafstories. So thank you again. I will talk to you guys next time. Sending you all love.
Without the ones like you, who work tirelessly to keep things running, everything would suddenly stop. Hospitals, factories, schools, and power plants, they all depend on you. No matter the weather, emergency, or time of day, you're the ones who get it done. At Grainger, we're here for you with professional-grade industrial supplies. Count on real-time product availability and fast delivery. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.